Whoa, an actual drawing before I build the robot? What am I, some type of a professional, planning out how I want the final build to look? Well, yeah, for this build I did actually draw out what I wanted the robot to look like, and I used pieces from my bits boxes as reference. Now this probably won't become a normal thing, but I wanted to give it a try for this one. This is actually one of the simplest robots I've made, especially when it comes to the number of parts. This entire base robot without paint was put together in under an hour. Now the main body here is made from this plastic cap and this resin lens, and then I'll add this bottle cap on top that I cut down. If I just glued it on like this, there would only be 4 very small points of contact, so I'm going to mix up a batch of epoxy putty and add it to the underside of the cap to fill that open space and help secure it all together. Moving on to the head, I'm going to start with this cap off of a witch hazel bottle. I like the little built-in smile here. So it's a bit too tall though, so I'll cut it off right at this connection point with a jeweler's saw, and then I can clean it up with a sanding stick. And it'll attach to the main body like this. I want the head to be a bit taller, so I'm going to add this cap. It's from one of those Propel electrolyte tablet tube things, and to cover up the little hole on top, I'm going to add this little plastic circle. I believe the eyes here come from exhaust ports of some Gundam that I had. Either way, they're going to make the cutest little eyes I think I've ever made. I fill the space in the back with this little blue plastic rod, and then once I've trimmed them to shape, I can clean them up with a sanding stick. I drill a small hole in the back so I can add a piece of armature wire, and this will allow me to bend the eye stalk into the shape that I want and attach it into the head. I can already tell at this point this is going to be such a cute little robot. I mean, just look at that little smile. You can't be mad looking at this skill guy. He's so cute. And to add to the cute factor, I'm going to make him a little antenna from a piece of scrap copper rod, a wooden bead, and a piece of a brass tube. Moving on to the arms, I start with this knockoff Lego dome thing, and this will act as the shoulder. I just remove this lip here to make things look a bit more flush when it's pressed against the side of the robot. I use a plastic pearl cabochon to fill the hole. The upper arm is made from this plastic rod that I cut down into the right length, about 3/4 of an inch. I'll add 2 connector pieces, one on each end, and glue them in place. Not only will these look cool, but they'll also add surface area to glue to and add some strength. I drill holes in each end so I can add some wire pins to add even more strength. Since this robot ain't got no legs, I have to make sure that the arms are strong enough to hold itself up. The forearms are made from a Gundam accessory part and a wooden bead for the elbow joint. I drill holes in the shoulder and the elbow to attach the upper arm and glue them in place. The wrist and the hands also come from Gundam accessory kits. I've made hands from scratch in the past, but they become a lot harder and more time consuming at this scale. Now this length of armature wire will attach the arms securely to the body. Then to cover up the holes on the elbow joint, I'm using some googly eye lenses. These are the little plastic circles that shake around in googly eyes. To add a bit more detail, I use the length of guitar wire and attach it to the upper arm. Now all I have to do is build a second arm, and after my first test fit, I can take it all apart and prepare it for painting. Before anything gets painted, it all gets scrubbed down with a wire brush to make sure that the paint actually sticks, and then I send it outside to get a coat of flat black primer and a coat of white spray paint. To stick with a cute, almost toy-like theme, I'm going with these bright oranges and yellows. It wasn't until much later in the editing process that I realized that because of the color and the shape, this bot looks like a character from Roly Poly Oly. It was a kid's cartoon from the late 90s, early 2000s. Maybe some deep memory in my childhood made me do it, but it wasn't a conscious decision, but I'll go with it. While that first layer of color is drying, I'll move on to making the base. I start with this wooden hexagon from the craft store and this piece of foam core poster board. Specifically, I'm using this brand here that you can find at the Dollar Tree. For this application, the cheapest stuff is actually the best because you can easily remove the paper like this. The more expensive stuff, it's actually a lot harder. To attach the foam to the wooden hexagon, I'm going to be using a special foam-safe superglue. Now this stuff can be a little pricey and harder to find sometimes, so an alternative is to just use Mod Podge. It'll work just fine, it'll just take longer to dry. You just can't use normal superglue or cyanoacrylate because it will eat away and dissolve the foam it touches. This may be overkill, but I like to rough up both sides to give the glue an extra tooth to hold on to. I apply the foam-safe glue like normal and then give the wood base a little shimmy while I'm pressing it against the foam to spread out the glue. Then I add a heavy block on top and just let it fully cure. I give it a few minutes and then using a utility knife I can cut the foam flush to the side of the wood, and then using a sanding stick I can clean up the edges and round over the corners. At this stage it's a bit too perfect looking, so I take my butane torch lighter and in a well ventilated area I carefully melt a bit of a natural floor texture into the foam. Creme brulee foam. I add a layer of Mod Podge just as a first coat of sealant, and then I can add even more floor texture. This texture comes in the form of lemon curd and blackberry preserves, also known as a jar of rocks and a jar of dirt. I add another layer of Mod Podge, and starting with the jar of rocks, I add a spoonful of the smaller rocks and dirt chunks and sprinkle it over the base. Then I use the more sifted dirt to fill the gaps and to do what dirt does best: look dirty. The spoon was to look a bit more civilized at first, but ended up sprinkling more of the dirt with my hands to get a bit more control. Now I have to lock the dirt in place. I start by spraying it with isopropyl alcohol and then dripping watered down Mod Podge over all the dirt. The alcohol just helps the glue get up all in the dirt's business, and when it dries, it'll hold all the dirt and the small rocks together. Fast forward overnight, the glue has dried and I can start to paint. I start by giving a base coat of flat black and then a coat of flat white. The first color I use is this dark brown contrast that I'll dilute a bit and then cover the entire base with. Now this painting process is a lot of bringing out the highlights and the shadows of the ground texture using a mix of washes for the low spots and the shadows and dry brushing for the high spots and highlights. Generally building from the darkest to the lightest, and using these cheap makeup brushes, I can get a really soft dry brushing effect. You can experiment with different colors to find what works best with the terrain you're building, and don't be afraid to add multiple washes like I'm doing to get the right color. It's definitely a bit of a trust the process kind of thing, and if you need to, you can always restart by putting a fresh coat of flat black primer on it and just starting from square one. I have a little box of these pre-made static grass tufts, and using a tweezer, I can glue them down into a random pattern and add a bit of foliage and scale to the model. You can always lighten these with a bit more dry brushing as well. And with that, you have yourself a nice little base to work with. I ended up using a slightly different base for the final model, but this is exactly how I made the one you'll see at the end. Okay, let's get back to painting our cute little robot. Now the accent colors are a mix of these two, mostly just for a better painting consistency, since one is a thinner airbrush paint and the other is more for hand painting. I keep it pretty simple and just add color in a few detail spots. And you know what time it is. Now that we're in the painting process, it is time for me to give a shout out to my patrons over on my Patreon. Thank you all so very much for your support. Your support really helps me not only in buying materials like these fancy new paints, but it also motivates me to make more videos. Of course, there is no pressure to join, but if you're interested and want your name shouted out in every video and some access to behind the scenes footage that no one else gets to see, go ahead and check out my Patreon. All the links at the end of this video, on my page, and in the description. Thank you. And if you're liking what you're seeing, please consider dropping a like, consider subscribing, commenting, all that good stuff that every YouTuber asks you to do. Thank you. I'm going to be making lenses for the eyes, and I did this technique in the last video, but this time I'm going to try to make them black. I start with some googly eyes and carefully cut off the clear lens part. Then I'll mix up a batch of UV resin and black airbrush paint to add to the lenses. Each one only needs a few drops, and I'm making 3 just in case I mess up on one. It was successful, and I have myself a few shiny black lenses that I can install in the eyes. I think the contrast between the black and the orange looks really cool. Moving on to weathering, I start with a concentrated mix of black acrylic paint and water, and then I dilute it with more water and a little bit of isopropyl alcohol to break the surface tension so it doesn't beat up on the surface of the model. I like starting with a concentrated black wash so I can make a custom batch for each model depending on how weathered I want it and what the base colors are. This kind of weathering shows up a lot more on lighter base colors like this versus darker colors like browns and blacks. For either application, I cover the entire part in the black wash and then I dab away some of the excess with a paper towel, just so it doesn't pool too much. The next weathering step involves this Tamiya weathering kit. You can also find off-brand ones online, and I'll be using one of those today. These makeup sponge brushes work great for these compressed powder pigments, and I get a mix of this rust and black to add more surface weathering to the robot. The last step was the black wash, and it was more focused on the low points and the panel lines, while this step is more focused on the edges and the faces of each section. You can see the difference between the left arm, which has the powder pigments and the wash, and the right arm, which just has the wash. As usual, I like to ask all of you as the viewers to think of what this robot's purpose is. It's got this interesting contrast, this cute, colorful robot, but it's obviously a bit dirty and banged up and walking through this arid, dry-looking landscape. Why is it out there? What is it doing? What does it come from? Why it doesn't have any legs and uses its arms to walk around? Let me know down in the comments if you have a fun idea for what this little guy is doing. You've all come up with some really great and unique ideas in the past for these robots, and I love reading those comments. The final step in weathering is adding some chipped paint effects using this gunmetal metallic and a small paintbrush. I'm also now just realizing that I totally forgot to add my water transfer decals, and this guy has some great spots for some, so I'm definitely missing out on that. That aside, I'm still really happy with how this cute little guy turned out, and I can't wait to show you all the nice photos at the end. I just have to put him all back together, attach him to the base with a wire pin, and with that, this project is pretty much complete. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was another fun, small bot this week, just like last week. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you. I do read every single comment and I try to respond if I can. I'll have a link in the description below to my Amazon storefront where you can find all the tools and materials that I use during these videos. At least most of them. Thanks again for watching, thanks again to my patrons, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.